and representatives from the World Bank, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. As you're aware, this event will continue on May 25th through 4 breakout sessions focusing on health services, education, the environment and sanitation, as well as justice. We have a very full program today, so without further ado, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce the Deputy Secretary General of RCC, Tanja Misevic, who will offer her welcome remarks. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me clearly. Best regards from the RCC, and it is my honor really to address to all of you on behalf of Regional Cooperation Council at the meeting, which is for the first time ever a regional forum organized in such a huge number, with such a huge number of participants dedicated to discuss the regional agenda and the regional efforts, not only in creating one document, but speaking about the unified agenda for the Western Balkans. I would really like to set the scene. Actually, I would like to take you through the very basics about the SE 2030. How come that RCC is responsible for preparing the document? What was the basis of the document? Is this for the first time that we are doing something like this? Why we are organizing a regional fora, and why we are so grateful for both ELIAMEP and TEPAV, but also all other civil society platforms around the region, and all of you participants of this today's webinar. So let me start with the idea of the SE 2030. So we were endorsed, so we were engaged and got the responsibility to prepare this document by the Southeast Europe Cooperation Process. That's it. I'm sure that you are all aware. Back in 2019 summit, to continue pursuing a policy of regional connectivity in all possible ways. Some elements of this declaration of the summit of the CETEP of 2019 actually point out that the SE strategy 2020 is coming to an end, and that the participants from the cooperation process expects from RCC to prepare a vision of post-SE 2020 strategy in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and 2030 agenda. So that was the main element when we started working on the framework of the document. We prepare a concept note. We presented to the RCC board in May 2020. This concept note has been approved by RCC board, and it actually reads and illustrates the main objectives of the 2030 SE strategy. Just few excerpts from this dedicated decision by the RCC and from the concept note. So the main objectives is to reach regional sustainable economic growth in order to reduce poverty and inequalities, to empower women in all sectors, to improve social inclusion, to address the phenomenon of depopulation in the region by enhancing the quality of life for its citizens, and to accelerate green and digital transition through genuine regional-owned political process. On the basis of these objectives and aspiring to render the strategy a truly inclusive and regional-owned process, which will be led by principles of bottom-up approach, we as the RCC Secretariat aim to reach out to the civil society organizations, vast civil society, so representatives of academia, think tank community, the private sector, and all relevant stakeholders in the Southeast Europe region in order to collect contributions and recommendations which will lead us towards the document which will be applicable to the wider region. And that is the reason why we are so proud to organize this with the TEPAV and with the ELIAMEP. So the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey and Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, and very glad to see there both directors with me today to open this event. But this is not all. During the presentation of the seminar, we also collaborated on the daily basis with the Institute for Public Policy from Romania, then Center for Sustainable Development of Serbia, Center for International Relations, Slovenia, Cooperation and Development Institute, Albania, Kosovo Civil Society Foundation, Institute Alternativa from Montenegro, Association for Development and Cooperation, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and expert group from Moldova. As you see, these seminars which were gathered today for its opening are generally regional open event. Of course, being regional does not exclude reaching out to international melee, whose support to the preparation of the strategy has been very solid. That is why I would also be very happy. I hope that this is not a reaction to my speech. That is why I am so happy to welcome also our prominent keynote speakers from the World Bank, UNECE, World Health Organization, great partners in this endeavor. Beside these international key speakers, we also honored to have a representative from dear friends from Greece in the keynote speech as the next Southeast European Cooperation Process Chair in office. And they've been with us from the beginning of the preparation of the strategy, and also Turkish Southeast Europe Cooperation Process Chairmanship through their political ownership and motivation. I have to tell you, we reached the drafting of the process of the SE 2030 strategy. I am well aware that you received the draft of the very strategy, which has been in consultation with all 13 SE economies, as well as with the relevant international, regional organizations. As one of our main principles in the preparation of this document, we apply the bottom-up approach to ensure the strategy building upon a common denominator, binding all the national level SDG implementation strategy in SE. Through this approach, we envisage to have a strategy as relevant as possible to the real socioeconomic challenges of Southeast Europe. In the same framework of mandate which was given to us by the SCCP leaders in 2019, the implementation of the strategy, which of course we expect to commence after its eventual endorsement, and the endorsement is planning to be during the summit in Antalya, which will be mid-18th of June, so in a month time, is to be regionally inclusive through comprehensive and coherent actionable policy intervention. In this regard, the EU policies and EU accession process will definitely be in the lead, while the overall policy coherence of SDGs and the SE 2030 would provide a complementarity framework through which all 13 economies will act in solidarity toward the joint target, connecting them with each other. In this regard, let me refer now to the vision that the draft SE 2030 strategy suggests before, of course, I conclude my remarks. I will try to be as brief as it possible, but I would also like to stress them all. So To repeat, the SE 2030 strategy will be a joint call for action by all Southeast European economies. We believe that the implementation of the strategy as contributing to life in the region free of poverty, disease, and where all live can thrive. Therefore, the strategy will support economies of the Southeast European part of Europe and their efforts to transform into a region with equitable and universal access to high quality education at all income levels of their society, to adequate and high quality healthcare and social protection, and to high environmental and sanitation standards of living. We consider the strategy to be one of the main policy level supporting instruments at the regional level to facilitate the efforts of Southeast Europe to have a region in which every economy enjoys sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. In this regard, the strategy offers regionally inclusive priorities and actions to discuss the ways and instruments for establishing much higher trade and transport connectivity between the SE economies in the region, and of course with the EU, as well as to outreach overseas through enhancing trade connectivity and utilizing all available modes of transportation to exploit their economic potential. In this endeavor, the strategy suggests decoupling their economic growth and carbon emission. Thus, the possibilities of better using renewable energy resources in the region will be a potential which has been underutilized for many years. Through the strategy, we believe that there is a place for higher regional cooperation between the SAE economies to pool their efforts in order to share the risk of natural and human-made diseases and their destruction to prevent their society pushed into poverty as a result of these diseases. One of the cross-cutting areas of the strategy would be the application of technology and wider use of digital tools to contribute to the efforts of the SE economies in, of course, reducing poverty and inequalities. That is why the strategy will advocate the use of digital tools and transformation and facilitating access of the whole of society to public services determining their quality of life. The implementation of green transformation in the SAE economies will also be another cross-cutting area. The implementation of the strategy will go hand in hand with establishing open and transparent mechanism of dialogue with the relevant civil society, think tank community, academia, as to promote the engagement and increase the relevant stakeholders, also awareness of the regional sustainable development agenda. The other important element is the dialogue with parliaments of the SE economies will furthermore be established to enhance political ownership of this endeavor. As you see, the draft strategy, which we are expected to discuss of the particularly second day of the seminar after the first one, it being the introductory and explanatory one, is with the aim to contribute to the drafting, offers a set of ambitious policy targets. We believe that the SE of 13 economies having $2 trillion of the GDP, US dollars of the GDP, and with its 150 million people, have the potential to cope with these challenges through regional cooperation which is genuinely built upon on their real socio-economic challenges, and via transparent, inclusive, and as well comprehensive economic settings. Thank you very much for not only your attention and patience to listen these introductory remarks, but we from the RCC are very grateful for all of you participating today and working on us on such an important document for the for the region and owned by the region. I wish you all the best of the success for today and of the gathering next Tuesday. And thank you very much, Ms. Novak. Back to you.
Thank you again, Mrs. Deputy Secretary General, for your very important remarks that will assist us today in framing our conversations about this ambitious endeavor. At this point, I would like to introduce the next speaker. We have Yanis Armakolas, who is the head of Southeast Europe program at ELIAMEP. Thank you very much, Mr. Armakolas. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here, and also on behalf of ELIAMEP, I would like to welcome everybody and thank RCC and our partners TEPAV for this endeavor. Tanya Mischevich, Professor Mischevich, of course, has given us a very insightful introduction to the rationale behind the strategy 2030 and why this is extremely important for the region. Maybe I can, for my introductory remarks, can offer a bit of more of a political overview, so to say, and why this strategy comes at a very critical moment. I think we will probably all agree that the Southeast Europe in general is at a critical juncture at the moment, since it seems to be at the receiving end of a potent mix of various geopolitical, economic, or political challenges. We have new geopolitical pressures. Most of the region, if not the entire region, of course, has for decades been dreaming its accession to the European Union. But the attraction of EU integration for ordinary citizens is weakening in the region at large, both among member states, but also among countries, in the countries that wish to join the European Union. And at the same time, the EU perspective for the countries that have not joined the European Union is also dimming, is also weakening. And we see challenges to the idea that the entire Southeast Europe should join the European Union being raised left and right in many EU member states, especially Western Europe. Overall, I think we do see the slowdown of the process of European integration in the region, something that has been termed EU enlargement fatigue, but we also see a sort of reform fatigue on the part of Southeast European or Western Balkan polities. But it's not only EU integration that seems to be suffering lately. Persistent problems, status issues or bilateral disputes already 30 years old seems to be again top on the agenda in the region, and this is of course politically complicating any efforts for regional cooperation and for a better future of the region. And of course, and last but not least, we have the socioeconomic challenges, which are very importantly, in important ways, connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. We all know that the Western Balkan states, despite the fact that they are supposedly in the process of joining the European Union, seem to diverge from the EU average when it comes to their economic performance and their economic volume. But also the rest of the countries, even those that are members of the European Union, seem also to be in a certain economic disadvantage. Greece has exited recently, almost decade-long crisis. The rest of the Balkan, Southeast European EU member states are at the bottom of the list of EU economies. And of course, Turkey, which is not an EU economy, of course, is also undergoing a kind of economic crisis at the moment. So overall, macroeconomically, things do not look good, but also at the level of social circumstances or socioeconomic circumstances for the societies in the region and the ordinary citizens, we also seem to be at the receiving end of difficult circumstances and difficult trends. We see demographic pressures, and we see migration waves from almost from the entire region. for more than a decade now. In the case of the Western Balkans, we have a massive migration and brain drain wave in the last decade towards countries in Western Europe, but it's not only Western Balkans. We have seen serious brain drain also among the Southeast European countries that have joined the European Union, and also in Greece, which is an older member state. During the decade of the crisis, we have seen migration of the most dynamic, the most educated, and the younger cohorts of the population. So overall, this points to certain challenges, policy challenges, socioeconomic malaise that is not only for the countries that are about to join the European or wish to join the European Union, are not only about the countries that are members of the European Union, but overall for the entire region. And therefore, I think the endeavor led by the RCC to bring in the region and discuss in a forward-looking manner the question of an agenda for sustainable development is extremely important. Development in the region in Southeast Europe must be sustainable. It has to have take into account the specificities and the problems and the malaise of the social environment, but also the natural environment. It has to be green and digital, as Tanya mentioned earlier. And it's important because of the social circumstances in the region that the goal of the SDGs, that no one is left behind, remains top of the agenda for the entire region and each individual country that is involved in this process. I think it's very important that the SDG and the 2030 strategy around SDGs is designed in order to enhance cooperation across sectors and actors. It's important that these development plans are not only about the governments, are not only about the private sector, but involves civil societies, involves all stakeholders, social, economic, and political. And it's also, as Tanya mentioned earlier, very much geared towards the green and digital transition that is led, of course, by other countries, but should come and is coming to the region fast. This holistic approach, this universal multi-stakeholder approach that is adopted in the SDGs and more specifically in our region by the endeavor led by the RCC is extremely important. It's very pertinent because of the socioeconomic problems and the political challenges that we mentioned earlier in Southeast Europe. Therefore, ELIAMEP is very happy and honored to join RCC, a very important organization for the region, which is, of course, highlights both the capacity, but also the will and the desire of all the countries of the region above and beyond membership of the EU or other political divisions and disputes to work together to bring the entire region to a better future. And we are happy to join also our colleagues, partners from Turkey, TEPAV, and the rest of the organizations that were mentioned by Tanya Miscevic earlier in this effort to bring meaningful consultations to the process. We look forward to today's discussion, or rather presentations, and very much look forward to next week's more thematic debates and consultations. And thank you very much, and we'll be continuing. Thank you very much, Cyril.
Thank you, Mr. Armacolas, where you further elaborated on some of the issues that the region is facing. And you also echoed the need for a holistic, multi-stakeholder approach to combat some of the challenges. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Guven Sak, the Program Director of TEPAV. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jared. Let me say a few, my job here is just to welcome you. So I have very brief remarks about the event that's co-hosted by TEPAV and ELIAMEP on this RCC's Southeast Europe 2030 strategy document. draft document, let's say, as far as I understand. So it's going to take shape within the framework of this discussion also. Let me start by commending Regional Cooperation Council for bringing the leading think tanks of the region together too, because I think there is significant untapped potential in our region in terms of policy communication, let's say. It's good to bring policy research institutes together. It's good to mobilize this capacity also in our region at the same time. I think that will be very much helpful to increase the bandwidth of communication between our countries, between the nations. So a very useful starting point as far as I see. And I'm happy to see about 10 leading think tanks in the region. I agree, you know, these are unprecedented times for all of us. So it's not easy, but it's a global phenomenon also. It's not only individual countries, it's not only about one region. COVID-19 has changed dramatically the context of all debates, all discussions all around the globe. But now there are efforts to move towards a post-COVID-19 environment. So this Green Deal in Europe or green and digital transformation on both sides of the Atlantic, I think is going to provide a solid framework for all of us, for our region too. For Turkey, for example, as around 60% of our exports are going towards the G7 countries, Turkey needs to adjust anyway. And this whole transformation agenda also brings together a kind of a policy framework for all of us to adjust. So it's good to, and I think this RCC's Southeast Europe strategy to be based on United Nations SDGs is a very good idea, because this whole transformation process is based on the SDGs being, started to be implemented. You know, since 2015, we have been discussing about the SDGs as a kind of a development agenda for both developing and developed countries at the same time. But now is the time to make that agenda operational, and that's what we are seeing all around the world. What is important is, I think, a just transition period is important for all of us. I think we need to look at, as Tanya has mentioned, actionable policy interventions along those lines. A just transition is important for our countries, for our region, basically. And Yannis has mentioned about the migration and other issues. It's obvious that if not managed properly, the geopolitical implications of the Green Deal or green transition is also going to produce more migration towards Europe too. So I think that's another important issue that needs to be taken into account. And I think that's why in talking about a holistic agenda for the region, I think we also need to be flexible in the coming period by taking into account this unprecedentedness, let me say, of the period that we are in. So let me thank the RCC Secretariat and ELIAMEP for making this happen, bringing us together. I'm very happy to be with you today and also on the 25th. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Sak, for your remarks, where you focused on the power of unifying the different think tanks of the region and the untapped potential that we might derive from these discussions. And also, I would like to just note your point on the importance of a just transition, especially as we focus on implementing the SDG agenda. So now this concludes the introductory remarks of our program. We're going to proceed now to our first presentation. Our first presentation is by Ms. Eleni Nicolaidou. She's the expert minister counselor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic, where she's focusing on Greece's policies on the implementation of the SDGs and also the correlation between the SDGs and EU policies. Mrs. Nicolaidou, we welcome you and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, distinguished participants. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I would like to congratulate the RCC, TEPAV, and ELIAMEP for organizing this event. We attach great importance to the discussions and the presentations, and we believe that they will make a positive contribution for the elaboration of this 2030 strategy, which is very important for the region, for Greece, for the region, for all of us, all the 13 Southeast economies. And I would like to congratulate the RCC for the first draft of the 2030 strategy. It provides an overall guidance on how Southeast Europe can further raise ambitions in SDG implementation at the regional level. My presentation will be divided in 3 parts. The first one is I will try to present the priorities of the Greek chairmanship in office, of the upcoming Greek chairmanship in office of Southeast Europe cooperation process. The second part will focus on accelerating the implementation of the UN 2030 agenda at EU level, and the third part, a small part, will be devoted to the SDG implementation in Greece. I have some slides, and I hope I will be able to share them with you. I'm trying to now share. Can you see them? Can you see them? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you and we can see them.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. Greece, well, as a founding member of Southeast European Cooperation Process and the RCC, but also an EU and the NATO member state, Greece has been striving for stability, security, development, and interconnectivity in the Western Balkans to the benefit of its people. We believe this to be truly feasible only through regional dialogue and cooperation, as well as through respect of good neighborly relations, and ultimately through the European integration of the Western Balkan partners. Our common ultimate goal is the intensification of socioeconomic development and the convergence to the EU acquis by offering know-how and exchanging of good practices. The aim is to build stronger ties of cooperation and good neighborly relations to promote a better coordination and cooperation on common challenges, but also identify opportunities in the region. As RCC follows the same goals, we highly value our cooperation. RCC has proved to be an efficient tool for enhancing cooperation, boosting overall development in the region, and implementing policies and practical measures. For example, RCC had a remarkable contribution to the initiation of the Green Lanes, linking the Western Balkans to the EU in order to ensure the unimpeded flow of food and medical supplies during the pandemic. Furthermore, we underline the pivotal role of the RCC at the development and the implementation of the Common Regional Market Action Plan for the period 2021-2024, which was adopted in the Sofia Summit of Berlin process in 2021, in order to facilitate the cooperation between the Western Balkan partners and the necessary reforms. Greece, as a founding member of Southeast European Cooperation Process, is eager to undertake its role as the chairmanship in office for the period from 1st of July 2021 until 30th of June 2022, in order to work along with all the members of the process as well as with the RCC. As Foreign Minister Vendia stressed in the ministerial meeting of Southeast European cooperation process on the 25th of June, enhancement of cooperation in issues of security, promotion of democratic reforms and human rights in the context of the European perspective of the Western Balkan region remain areas of strategic interest of us. Allow me to use this opportunity to highlight more concretely the priority areas of the upcoming chairmanship of Athens. The first priority is the enhancement of cooperation on issues of security. The second one is exchanging views in the context of the European perspective of the region, especially in the fields of democracy, rule of law and human rights, prevention of ultranationalism, xenophobia, and EU skepticism through solidarity and socioeconomic support. Third, strengthening of connectivity in all its forms, including transport, infrastructure, for the purpose of sustainable economic development. Fourth, addressing environmental concerns, promotion of sustainable, equitable, and green growth. Fifth, monitoring the socioeconomic repercussions of COVID-19 pandemic with a view to accelerating the economic recovery of the region. And sixth, enhancement of cooperation in the fields of investment and competitiveness, addressing the important problem for all of us, brain drain, as a common challenge for the economic and social future of the region. Allow me to add here that during the Hellenic chairmanship of Southeast European cooperation process, the following high-level meetings are also going to be hosted. Meeting of the Ministers of Education, meeting of the Ministers of Interior Civil Protection, a formal and informal meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, and the Southeast European Cooperation Process Summit. In the light of the upcoming Athens Southeast European Cooperation Process chairmanship in office, we're already looking forward to intensifying our cooperation with the RCC, working together for a better future of our region, and engaging in a structural dialogue and coordination between the Southeast European Cooperation Process participants, the EU, and other regional organizations. I will now concentrate on the second part of my presentation, which, as I mentioned, is accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda at the EU level. The pandemic has put us further behind on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, which provide the universal blueprint for sustainable recovery. The UN has released recently an advanced version of the UN Secretariat Annual Report on SDG progress. The report begins by stressing that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, SDG progress was not on track. Progress towards the goals was not occurring fast enough for the achievement of the 2030 agenda and was even stalled or moving backwards in some areas. According to this report, the world's collective response in the next 18 months will determine whether the pandemic turns out to be a much needed wake-up call. The EU and its member states are fully committed to accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, in order to ensure the delivery of the SDGs by 2030 and leave no one behind. The EU, the European Commission staff working document delivering on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, a comprehensive approach shows the Commission's commitment to integrating the SDGs into the European semester, the multi-annual financial framework, and the recovery instrument Next Generation EU, mainstreaming the SDGs in its proposals and the implementation of EU policies and instruments, including through integrating the SDGs in better regulation tools, ensuring policy coherence for sustainable development. Sorry about it. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is aimed at building a more sustainable, resilient, and fairer Europe in line with the SDGs through reforms and public investments in response to the challenges identified in the context of the semester, including in regard to the SDGs. In addition, the European Green Deal is the Commission's proposed new sustainable growth strategy and the ambition to contribute directly to 12 out of the 17 SDGs. The EU member states are acting together as Team Europe. Our collective external response combines the financial resources of the EU, the member states, the European Investment Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to make a bigger impact and offer tangible solidarity to our partner countries. The global amount of the Team Europe country package reaches over 40 billion euro. That was as from January 2021. And now I will turn to the final part of my presentation, which is about the SDG implementation in Greece. In December 2016, the General Secretariat of the government was assigned the task to coordinate and monitor the implementation of the SDGs in Greece. In 2018, Greece presented its voluntary national review in the UN high-level political forums for sustainable development. 8 priority areas aligned with 17 SDGs. In order to prepare these 8 priorities areas, a wide social dialogue took place in order with our social partners, in order to get feedback and proposals from all key stakeholders in Greece, and in order to set the 8 national priorities. In May 2019, we have adopted 146 national indicators in order to track the progress. And in October 2020, we have updated these national indicators. In 2019, we have a new law which restructured the center of the government. The General Secretary of the government was abolished and the presidency of the government was introduced, which is now monitoring the implementation of the SDGs. In May 2020, integration of the SDGs in the legislation and in its accompanying documents through the new regulatory impact assessment manual. Ministries are now obliged to take into consideration the SDGs and indicate for every new regulatory initiative which of the SDGs is covering. The SDGs and sustainable development policy areas are also currently covered in the annual action plans of the ministries, the Consolidated Government Policy Plan, the Greek National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and the European Semester Policy Framework. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nicolaidou, for this very important information that you presented, particularly that related to Greece's priorities as it prepares to undertake the chair of the SEECP. Now we will move on to our next presentation, which is by Ms. Sanja Majarevic-Swister. She is the senior economist of the Western Balkans related to macroeconomics, trade, and investment at the World Bank.
Thank you very much, distinguished hosts, speakers, panelists, and the other participants. It's really a pleasure to participate in development of such an important document like the SE strategy for 2030. I will proceed with the presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Let me just move this one. Okay, so I was given a task to cover an economic update as well as an outlook for the Southeast European region. In the World Bank, we have this definition of the region separated in 4 units. So we deal separately with the Western Balkans, separately with Turkey, separately with Moldova, separately with the EU countries that belong to your definition of Southeast Europe. So I'll try to be brief, but you need to understand that it's a lot to cover. So the title of the presentation is Subdued Recovery. And I hope you understand why we frame it like this, because indeed, after the deepest recession in the recent history that has been observed by majority of the countries in this Southeast European grouping, what we're expecting is a rebound, and we're already seeing it, but the reaching out the pre-crisis growth levels will take time to achieve. And this has been happening in a context where countries have been applying really unprecedented support and measures, both through fiscal as well as monetary policies. Welfare improvements in the region were also interrupted. However, the labor market, which has been immediately impacted by the crisis, is now rebounding from the truths of the recession, to a large part due to the government fiscal support that has been provided across the countries in the region. Fiscal situation therefore eroded rapidly. In many countries, we are seeing public debt reaching historical high. In some countries like Turkey, the fiscal impact has been much better contained than for example, and in the case of Montenegro, that has been hit hard, given that it's a service-based economy, tourism-based economy. For the outlook, we do expect a recovery in 2021, but it will take 1.5 years, almost 2 years, to some countries to recover to the pre-crisis growth. So this recovery will be highly divergent across the region. And in terms of the priorities going forward, apart from addressing or bringing the economies back on the fiscal sustainability path, our priorities are now focused on supporting and the policies that would impede or boost green, resilient, and inclusive development. So let me take you through several of the visuals that would support the key messages. And I will try to split it by the 4 groupings that we have been working in the World Bank. So when it comes to the EU countries, what we are already observing is that the region has been heavily hit by the crisis in the first wave in particular. But what we are now seeing is that the economies have responded much better to the second wave of infection that has started in the second part of 2020. Despite the government stringency indexes. So factories have found a way to continue working. Many labor has moved to the online-based work, to home-based work. Some services have been still provided by government. So despite the struggle, the second wave of infection, the countries have faced much better. There are still issues, in particular with the delivery supply chain. We are observing this very carefully because it also impacted the inflation across not only the EU countries, but also in the rest of the region. However, the countries, despite the second wave of COVID, have fared much better. The growth at the end of last year has still been in a negative territory, and we see that in the first quarter of this year, many of the countries are still in the negative territory. Unemployment rates have picked up as government support programs in the second part of the year became more selective. Initially, through wage subsidy programs and unemployment support, the governments have been able to mitigate partially the crisis impact. But as they have become more selective due to the fiscal constraints, we see the unemployment rates slowly picking up. The other phenomenon that is also seen in the Western Balkan region is that inactivity has also increased, which is a concern in particular in the Western Balkan region, where the labor force participation has already been very low even before the crisis. In the Western Balkan region, we are seeing also bottoming out from the deepest recession since independence in some of the countries. If we look from the sectoral perspective, only 2 sectors have been turning positive last year, and this was the ICT and agriculture, which clearly shows some competitive advantage, in particular in the current context where the pandemic still continues. And we have also seen that employment, although initially declined quite deeply in some of the countries, has started also bottoming out. It's far from declaring the crisis over, but at least we are seeing some signs of improvement and recovery. Unfortunately, 2 years of welfare gains were lost, meaning that the assessed poverty rate for the region have returned to 2018, even in some cases to 2017 levels. So an immediate action is needed to avoid the permanent scarring of this crisis. What would that mean? It would mean that countries would need to pay especial attention to bringing people back to the labor market to support the job creation going forward, as we already see discouraged labor moving from the labor market to inactivity, as I said earlier. And this was happening across the board, across all of the 6 countries that we classify under Western Balkan. Turkish economy also rebounded strongly in the second half of 2020, in particular as COVID restrictions have relaxed. And we could see this also on the right-hand chart, which shows the stringency index and daily deaths, which remained quite high. So the policymaker seems to have given more weight on rebounding the economy than to protecting livelihoods from the death toll statistics from the crisis. But this was also, in a way, a choice across many of also EU countries where they simply could not afford closing the economies, being afraid that this may lead to even stronger social consequences of this crisis. However, the labor market shock has worsened the existing disparities, and in particular, when it comes to vulnerable groups that were vulnerable even before the crisis. So we could see that in terms of employment losses, it's the female and youth, informal labor and unskilled labor that have been impacted much stronger than was the case for male or adults or formal or skilled labor. And the assessed poverty rate for Turkey suggests that in the course of the last 2 years, it's almost 3 million people that have been that have become poor. This is the absolute poverty number based on the consumption-based poverty. In the case of Moldova, Moldova still faces a protracted recovery. The expectation is that they will reach the pre-COVID level only in 2020. In 2020, this country has not only been affected by the COVID-19 shock, but also by the drought, the extreme weather event that has then had a double impact on the economic growth. This country still faces one of the highest death rates of COVID-19 crisis in per population in Europe. So the pandemic is is still present and is yet to be seen how the country will fare out from the current wave. Additionally, the remittances decline that happened because many of the migrants have returned to the country, given that they lost jobs that were precarious, of the precarious nature in mostly in the EU member states, have also led to welfare losses for households. Many households live on the remittances from diaspora. But in addition, there were major employment losses also happening across almost all sectors. So the estimated poverty increase last year was 3 percentage points. So where are we in the crisis cycle now in May 2021? So if you look at the stringency index as of, this was May 17th, so a few days ago, we see that the majority of Europe is still preserving quite strong containment measures, although they are slowly relaxing, like is the case now in, for example, Austria or France or UK. But this relaxation is going slower than initially expected. In some countries like Turkey, the restrictions are still quite strong, and this is compared to the restrictions. This is the Oxford COVID stringency index, which assumes number of categories. When you compare it with the real-time data in terms of the mobility of population, and here I have only choose the one Google Mobility Index, which shows retail and recreation sectors that are most affected by the containment measures, then you could see that despite the relaxation of measures, you still have economies that are 20, even in some cases 60% below the pre-pandemic levels. So this is, it still shows that we are in a recessionary mode. What were the policy responses to such set of events, unprecedented events? So in the EU, indeed, the fiscal support was unprecedented. They had a fiscal space to react. They had also monetary support to react to the crisis. Nevertheless, many countries have seen the debt levels elevated. Romania in particular, I want to emphasize here, Bulgaria operates the currency board, so they have been quite disciplined in keeping the deficit in check. When it comes to the monetary policy response, we have also seen some of the measures that we were not observing earlier in the skill set or the policy set of the central banks. For example, asset purchases have not been applied earlier before this crisis in many of the Southeast European economies. Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania have all tested this new instrument to support the balance sheet's expansion. Then this led to further mobilization of liquidity as well as to a reduction of interest rate. However, what we are also observing is that although still in many countries the moratorium on debt repayments for households as well as firms are now being unwound, and most of these measures will be still in place until June or September of this year. And this has also prevented the non-performing loans to rise. However, the trend of increasing share of, let's say, more risky loans or that might default after the crisis, after the moratorium are lifted, are increasing. So the question is to what extent we would see prevention of this current crisis to turn into the vulnerabilities of the financial sectors across the region. The good news is that most of the banks have been well capitalized and are still well capitalized. So the buffers that have been put in place before the crisis would allow for maneuvering through another year of the recession. Fiscal situation in the Western Balkan also eroded rapidly. Some countries like Montenegro has seen its public debt reaching, surpassing the GDP level. It is concerning because of the ability to refinance this debt going forward. We have also seen crowding out of capital spending at the expense of social spending. So some very difficult decisions will have to be made after the crisis to reallocate spending towards those that are more productive. And also in the case of the Western Balkans, the financial sector withstood the crisis well so far, but it's also testing its resilience. The buffers have been there even before the crisis. The change that we will see is that we will see more of the non-performing loans coming in and the new quest for the financial sector refinancing. In Turkey, we can say that the country has, in terms of the fiscal support package, been leading the OECD even group of countries. So they had almost 15% of GDP in the fiscal support through various instruments, deferred revenues, contingent liabilities, asset purchases, additional spending, used to offset partially the crisis impact. And we have also seen that they were able, so this has not prevented the credit crunch, but we have also seen that they were able to, in a way, prevent deeper fiscal vulnerability by relying on this, more on the stimulus through the credit stimulus than relaxing the tax deferrals or through direct spending. So the central government debt remained pretty much in check despite the crisis. Yet what we are observing is the rise in the inflation as well as some already initial tightening of the monetary policy that we are expecting also to happen across Europe in the years to come. In the case of Moldova, the impact on the fiscal policy was quite severe. The fiscal deficit has widened to -5%. However, if you talk to the firms, they would say that a little of this fiscal support came to prevent further job losses. So Moldova fares as the country where the percentage of firms that received national or local government assistance has been the lowest in the group. So most of the fiscal deficit came on the back of the lost revenues and support to households, direct support through the social assistance. So where we are in the with the outlook. As I said, we are expecting a moderately positive growth outlook across the region. Turkey is the only country in the group that has not seen the recession last year, according to the preliminary assessments. But some countries like Montenegro have seen a double-digit recession, which will be very difficult and will take a long time to recover from. And we are also seeing downside risks that are still significant. And they are related not only to the evolution of the pandemic and vaccination, that in the region, as a sub-region of EU, yes, it goes slower and it's protracted. However, this area on the global map is still the area with the highest vaccination rate. So that taken that into account, we do still see some risks related to, for example, suspension of vaccines due to safety concerns, higher reluctance, and then possible, third or the fourth wave of the pandemic. If this pandemic gets protracted, that may erode bank buffers, may lead to bankruptcies of illiquid but still viable firms and further job losses. And therefore, the policy support needs to be still contained and maintained until the pandemic is not over. In some other groups within the region, the Western Balkan groups sees the risk of further delays in the accession negotiations that may reduce further the appetite for reforms and adjustment of their legislation and standards with the EU acquis that may also erode the investors' interest. So indeed, these are the risks that I mentioned. The recovery post-COVID may be slower than hoped for. This was the region that also has seen the potential growth decelerating even before the crisis. And this was mostly due to the low factor productivity. So productivity was low to start with, but it's also an aging region that does not have major contributions from labor to growth. And the slow recovery may hamper swift regaining back of the lost welfare. On the right-hand chart, you see how much GDP per capita changes or output per capita has been compared to the pre-pandemic levels. So this will clearly leave the scars on the reduced welfare and the poverty reduction objectives in the region. However, post-COVID recovery will not be able to rely so much on the fiscal support as it was during 2020. As the fiscal space has narrowed, we are seeing, as I mentioned, historic levels of public debt. And this is all happening in an environment of very low interest rates, and which is not to be expected to continue for much longer. And therefore, countries will need to start putting back the appropriate fiscal sustainability plans in place. And last but not the least, I would want to mention that the efforts for recovery and plans for recovery will need to take into account the structural issues on the labor side. This is still a region that, including Bulgaria and Romania and Moldova and Turkey, where the labor force participation is still low, employment rate is still low. There is a missing middle of the labor force that is retiring early, or female employment that is extremely low. But this is compounded also by the skills shortfalls that firms keep on reporting when trying to expand their businesses in the region. And without much elaboration, I would also stress that in the choices of how to build back better post-COVID, there are three pathways. One is to just rely on the current or pre-crisis growth pattern that would lead to the growth rebound, but it would be unsustainable and non-climate resilient pathway. The countries can opt to go for decoupling the growth from carbon emissions, which would be good for the long-term sustainability, but they can also, which is the pathway one, think of making this decoupling also inclusive and think of the just transition. So if this is applied, then we would see in the region a rebounding that could be green, resilient, and more inclusive than it was before the crisis. Thank you very much. Hope I have not taken too much of your time. And I wish you also a successful workshop. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your presentation, which, as you pointed out at the beginning, it was an ambitious task. but we appreciate all of your information about the economic outlook for Southeastern Europe. Now, moving on to our next presentation, I would like to introduce Ms. Monica Lin from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. She's the Principal Advisor and the Director of the Sustainable Development and Gender Unit. And today she's going to speak with us about the implementation of the UN SDGs in Europe and the challenges that are encountered in reaching the targets by 2030. Mrs. Lin, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. And well, thank you first for inviting UNECE to take part in this seminar and also to provide comments on the strategy. We're most happy to do so. I have prepared a few slides. So now let me also try to share the screen. We'll see if that works. Start slideshow. Good. Okay, sorry. It took a while. Yes, let me start by saying that definitely the COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed powerful forces of change that will continue to transform the world in which we live even after the health emergency abates. At the same time, we're in the decade of action and time is running short to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. To know how fast we need to run, it is essential that we have a good idea of how far we are from meeting the final targets on the 2030 agenda. Now, the 2021 SDG Progress Report prepared by UNECE explicitly asked the question of whether our region, and that means the 56 states of North America, Europe, Central Asia, and Caucasus, is on track to meet the goals by 2030. An advanced statistical methodology used by all 5 UN regional commissions was used to assess progress on the basis of the available data so far. Besides the presentation of performance indicators, the report also presented stories and insights that have been contributed by UN agencies and country teams. You will find lots of data on SDGs with attractive visualizations and the full report in the UNECE website. So going back to the question, are we on track? As you can see here, the picture is mixed. This is the traffic light approach. So whatever is green is on track. What is yellow needs to accelerate. What is red needs to be reversed. And then you see the gray where we don't have reliable data. On the basis of past trends, the region would achieve only 23 targets out of the 169 by 2030. Progress in 57 targets should accelerate. And for other 9 targets, the trends are negative and need to be reversed. For 80 targets, almost half of the total, there is no sufficient national data to track change over time. Much progress is necessary, therefore, not only to meet the targets, but also to improve data availability, including in countries with well-developed statistical systems. There are areas where meeting the goals is clearly within reach, including extreme poverty, undernourishment and malnutrition, and access to basic services and adequate housing. But targets to reduce nationally defined poverty and multidimensional poverty are unlikely to be achieved. The sustainability of the food supply is uncertain. The risk of extinction among local livestock breeds, an important source of sustainable nutrition, is projected to increase by 2030. More than half of the health targets require acceleration, while road traffic safety, health impacts of pollution, and the management of health risks have been improving across the regions. Country situations remain very divergent. The region has made good progress on clean fuels and technology, energy efficiency, and cutting fossil fuel subsidies. But targets on economic productivity and innovation and infrastructure development display adverse trends. I would like to emphasize that much needs to be done in critical areas related to climate change and the environment, including the conservation of ecosystems, biodiversity, disaster resilience, waste generation and treatment, and the sustainable use of natural resources. UNECE is particularly active on these and related issues and will support its member states in accelerating progress. The thematic focus of our recent 69th session of the Commission, which took place just now in April, was the promotion of the circular economy and the sustainable use of natural resources in our region. And we believe that this session has given further impetus to our work in this area. Now, the statistical picture of the situation that I just presented to you does not yet reflect the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, because the data then were not yet available, which has had immediate negative consequences for multiple SDGs, including, among others, the health indicators, given the strain that the COVID-19 crisis has put on health systems, SDG 3. The pandemic may further stall progress in areas such as mental health, substance abuse, and health workforce development. Gender equality due to women's occupational profile and caring responsibilities, SDG 5. The dramatic worsening of the economic situation has brought increased poverty and rising inequality, SDGs 8 and SDG 10, and I think we've just heard a lot about that from my colleague from the World Bank. While these effects have been rather generalized, the extent to which they have played in different countries varies. In fact, the pandemic has exposed pre-existing weaknesses in health systems, in social protection, in digital access for all, access to education, and many others. It has also underlined the vulnerabilities resulting from productive specialization and the state of public finances. While indicators related to SDGs on people and prosperity have clearly worsened, some related to planet have been affected positively. Some environmental pressures have abated because of lower economic activity. But this is a temporary respite and does not reflect policy changes. Moreover, looking forward, there is a danger that concerns related to the response to the COVID-19 crisis undermine the commitment to climate action. So the challenge we face is triple. How do we attend to the socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19 crisis? How do we reverse some of the negative trends that have been exacerbated, such as growing inequality, so that immediate impacts do not become persistent over time? And critically, how do we ensure that the recovery is well aligned with the 2030 agenda? Let me now zoom in on a few environmental issues which, as I mentioned earlier, define areas where progress and implementation should accelerate. These issues are also important because they show how synergies in SDG implementation can be harnessed for faster progress across different goals. Air pollution has significant economic and personal costs. In part of the UNECE region, in particular in some countries of Southeast Europe, the levels of air pollution and their negative implications are rather large. Air pollution, as many environmental questions, is a transboundary issue that can be best tackled through international cooperation, but action at the local level is also critical. Engaging cities in addressing air pollution, including through the development of new mobility solutions and urban planning, can yield significant benefits. Addressing the defining challenge of our time, climate change, requires drastically reducing the use of fossil fuels, which are also a source of pollution. We need to change the energy mix, but also to become more efficient in the use of energy and other resources. The push for clean energy and improved resource efficiency, which will reduce dependence on fossil fuels, can contribute to multiple SDGs, improved health outcomes, and progress in climate change mitigation, but also more competitive and resilient economies. We need to exploit the opportunities that the COVID-19 crisis brings to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs in this decade of action. In many advanced countries, governments are launching stimulus packages to boost economic growth and set the economies on the path to recovery. It is imperative that the government responses to the economic shocks are well aligned with the 2030 agenda. And in particular, it is critical that they contribute to climate change mitigation by accelerating the deployment of clean energy and infrastructure. A recent study carried out by UNECE and ILO under the Transport, Health and Environment Pan-European Program called the TEPAV also shows how appropriate policies can deliver simultaneous benefits across multiple SDGs. An accelerated shift towards greener land transport in the UNECE region could create 2.5 million jobs in the region in the period up to 2030 by doubling investment in public transport only. Many interesting initiatives are being carried out in the UNECE region and beyond that seek to advance the greening of the economy as part of the recovery efforts. While the situation is dynamic, there is significant scope for strengthening current efforts. According to the Global Recovery Observatory, the source for this slide, the spending tagged as environmentally positive accounts for only around 17% of recovery spending in 2020 in the 50 leading economies. And that, of course, is a little bit of a disappointing figure. We need to fully use existing opportunities and we need to create new ones. The recently released report of the Secretary General on progress towards the SDGs, that was already mentioned by one of the earlier speakers, makes it clear that, and I quote, to get the SDGs back on track, governments, cities, business and industries have to use the recovery to adopt low carbon, resilient and inclusive development pathways that will reduce carbon emissions, conserve natural resources, create better jobs, advance gender equality, and tackle growing inequities. So this is the task ahead of us. In looking for answers to the perennial question, what is to be done, please let me share with you some of the messages that came out from the recent regional fora on sustainable development. They took place in each of the 5 regions in the UN system and were led by the 5 regional economic commissions. Now, some of the central messages. First, there is a need to invest in health and social protection systems that are people-centered and gender responsive. The COVID-19 pandemic has cruelly exposed this need. Second, we need a renewed and strengthened commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment that translates into concrete actions. Third, investment in innovation and data is crucial as critical levers to achieve the SDGs. And finally, the need to harness digitalization for SDG implementation. COVID-19 has accelerated trends that were already underway, and this acceleration is likely to prove a long-lasting legacy. Some additional messages came out from our Regional Forum on Sustainable Development for the UNECE region, which took place in March and gathered around 1,000 participants online, of course. First, a long-term approach is required beyond the immediate response to the COVID-19 crisis. This approach should rely on trade and innovation and leverage public and private investment into infrastructure to foster economic dynamism. The crisis also represents an opportunity to put tourism on a sustainable path. We had one of our peer learning roundtables focusing specifically on that. And this is, of course, an issue that is very relevant also for Southeastern Europe. Second, young people have been hit strongly by the crisis, and their needs and concerns should be well reflected in the recovery plans. And third, all segments of society should be involved in addressing the climate change and biodiversity crisis while taking an intergenerational approach. We need a transition to a circular economy based on sustainable consumption and production. A variety of instruments should be developed to bring about the change in behavior that results in sustainable lifestyles. Now, let me conclude by briefly introducing UNECE's work. UNECE's contribution to address the COVID-19 crisis and its consequences include some instruments that were relevant in the initial emergency situation. Our activities are, however, particularly relevant to help our member states to reduce risk and recover better in a way that advances further the implementation of the SDGs. Our action framework for responses to the COVID-19 crisis includes 3 main pillars, which you see on the slide. First, facilitate connectivity including by enhanced cooperation and implementation of a regulatory framework for border crossings and the use of digital tools in trade and transport. Second, address transboundary and other risks through the use of UNECE multilateral agreements, standards, and statistical frameworks for informed decision-making. And finally, support a green and resilient recovery, including by improved resource use and the promotion of the circular economy, tapping in particular into the potential of cities as drivers of the recovery and the development of sustainable infrastructure. Thank you very much for your attention, and for more information on our work, please visit our website. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much for this information on where we stand within the framework of implementing the SDGs in Europe, and also for offering some policy tools on how we can improve. Now I'd like to move to our next presentation and introduce Ms. Sarah Thompson from the World Health Organization. She's a senior health financing specialist in senior health. She will be discussing today challenges with addressing COVID in the post-COVID environment and equal access to the medical care services. Mrs. Thompson, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning, this afternoon. And I'm particularly interested because WHO has just started a 3-year project on health system strengthening in the Western Balkans, which is funded by the EU, by DG NEAR. And so I expect that we will be reaching out to and hoping to work with many of you in the coming 3 years. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. Do you see my slides?
Yep, they're perfect.
Great. So today I want to talk about whether COVID-19, whether the pandemic might be a threat for universal health coverage in Europe specifically. And the analysis that I want to present to you is really based on 3 pieces of work that we have done in the WHO Barcelona Office for Health Systems Financing. The first is a report that's just out looking at trends in health spending in Europe, covering the period from 2000 to 2018, just before the pandemic hit, but also with a chapter that looks at the implications of the pandemic for health spending in Europe in the coming years. We also have done an analysis looking at whether people can afford to pay for healthcare in Europe. And this is really central to the issue of the idea of universal health coverage, which means that no one should experience unmet need for healthcare or dental care or for medicines, and that nobody should experience financial hardship when they're using health services. And then the last piece of analysis that I want to draw on today is a study that we did 5 years ago, looking at how health systems in Europe responded to the 2008 global financial crisis that then became an economic crisis and affected many countries in the region very, very badly. And I want to think about how some of the lessons that we might have learned from that crisis might be applicable in the economic shock that the pandemic has caused for many countries across Europe. So I want to focus on why COVID-19 might be a threat for universal health coverage, then look at some lessons that we might learn from the experience of the global financial crisis, and then focus on what countries can do better this time. So COVID is likely to be a source of pressure for health budgets in the years ahead. We've heard the prognosis for the economic recovery from our colleague from the World Bank. What will happen when it comes to health? Well, certainly there is going to be a need for higher spending on health. Countries are still responding to the pandemic, but there is going to be a huge effort to continue to prevent more outbreaks of COVID-19, particularly through the vaccine rollout. At the same time, countries are struggling to maintain the provision of other health services. And in many countries, there's been a huge backlog of delayed or cancelled health services. And this might have potentially a significant impact on many people in terms not just of lower health status, but for the health system in terms of higher health service unit costs. And if I just take the example of the country that I come from, the United Kingdom, Right now, nearly 5 million people are waiting for hospital treatment in the UK. This is the highest level of waiting times for treatment that since records began, and a substantial time that people are waiting for, on average 12 weeks. So in many countries, a really enormous backlog that countries will need additional financial and human resources to address. And then, of course, all the negative impacts of a financial and economic crisis, unemployment, poverty, increasing demand for publicly financed health services. And then most importantly, in the context of COVID, making sure that health systems, countries are really prepared for future shocks, whether they're economic or health shocks like the pandemic. So there's going to be need for more money for health, but there's also going to be pressure on health budgets because of the economic contraction, because of rising unemployment, falling wages. We heard about the decline in remittances and the increase in poverty. So COVID-19 is more likely to be a threat, for health system financial sustainability in the years to come, but it may be a threat, more of a threat in some health systems than others, because not all health systems in Europe have the same degree of resilience to shocks. And I just want to show you 3 slides to expand a little bit what I mean by health system resilience. So health systems are likely to be more resilient when public spending on health is high, because this means that out-of-pocket payments are going to be low. And this chart here shows you on the horizontal axis, public spending on health across the European Union, including the Southeastern European countries represented here today. Public spending on health as a percentage of GDP. And on the vertical axis, you can see out-of-pocket payments as a share of current spending on health. There's a lot of variation across the region, but many of the countries represented today have low levels of public spending on health and high out-of-pocket payments. And that doesn't bode well in terms of being resilient. And the reason for this is because when out-of-pocket payments are high, the financial hardship that households who use health services experience can be very high. So this figure shows you on the horizontal axis, out-of-pocket payments as a share of current spending on health. And on the vertical axis, you can see the share of households with catastrophic health spending. This is households who are spending so much out-of-pocket on healthcare that they are not able to meet their other basic needs, to pay for food, for housing, utilities, and so on. And you can see that, again, there's a wide variation across the countries in the region, but some countries with high out-of-pocket payments having very high levels of catastrophic health spending. And when we dig a little bit deeper in the work that we've done, we can see that the catastrophic health spending is much higher among poorer households, as we would expect. And it's also very much driven by households spending on outpatient medicines, particularly because of co-payments for outpatient medicines. And then the last reason why some health systems are less resilient than others, many countries in Europe, and especially in the region that we're talking about today, this group of countries, rely very heavily on employment, on labor market taxes to finance the health system. And we know that these types of taxes are very cyclical. As the economy contracts, revenue from employment also contracts. So if your health system is very reliant on revenue from employment, this is a threat when faced with an economic shock. But the other way in which these health systems are also less resilient is because many countries with social health insurance schemes financed through labor taxes also link access to healthcare on health insurance status. If you don't pay your contributions, then you do not have access to a broad range of health services. And this really does present a problem in terms of coverage gaps for people. And this chart here shows you the share of the population covered by publicly financed health services across the EU and the countries in this group today. And the blue countries are countries that are mainly financed through the government budget, and the orange countries, and I've highlighted the countries represented today in the stripy orange bit, these are mainly financed through social health insurance schemes. And you can see on the right-hand side of the chart countries financed through social health insurance, particularly in these countries, are less likely to cover the whole population. So health systems that have low levels of public spending on health, health systems that have high out-of-pocket payments, and health systems that rely heavily on the labour market to finance healthcare are particularly likely to be affected negatively by economic shocks in the years ahead. So what can countries do to cope with the budgetary pressure? And are there lessons that can be learned from the experience of the global financial crisis in 2008? Many countries had a very, very difficult time during this crisis, and many faced a lot of external pressure through economic adjustment programs and so on. And one of the outcomes of that was austerity, which really slowed public spending on health in countries across Europe. And you can see in the first bit of this chart, this is data aggregated across the whole of the European region. In the years before the crisis, GDP was growing strongly, public spending on health was growing really strongly, and out-of-pocket payments as well in red. And then the crisis hit, GDP experienced negative growth, public spending on health massively slowed down, and out-of-pocket payments, which also slowed down as households' income dropped, slowed down too, but not quite as slow as public spending on health. And then in the years after the economic crisis, GDP rebounded, public spending on health increased, but not as fast as the economy did, and not as fast as out-of-pocket payments did. So we could say that countries went into the 2008 crisis in a much better position than countries entered the crisis caused by the pandemic. And this slowdown in public spending on health had a really negative impact on country progress towards universal health coverage, particularly for countries, and I've selected a group of countries here that were very badly hit by the crisis. The chart on the left-hand side shows you the increase between 2008, the year before the crisis, to 2015, the increase in access barriers, which led to an increase in unmet need for healthcare, really surprisingly high increases in access barriers across these countries. And also in the chart on the right-hand side, you see a massive increase in some countries of financial hardship, the incidence of catastrophic health spending really increasing in some of the countries that were very badly hit by the crisis. So this is just to show that when countries reduce spending, public spending on health, and out-of-pocket payments increase, it has very, very tangible negative impacts for households. And in both of these cases, unmet need and financial hardship, it was the poorest households who were most badly affected. So what can countries do this time to avoid the mistakes of the previous economic shock, the 2008 global financial crisis? One of the key lessons learned from that crisis is that if you have well-designed public policy, you can mitigate negative effects. And I think that is very, very true in the case of the pandemic too. And the steps taken to mitigate negative effects in the pandemic will also help to build health system resilience in the future. So 3 key steps here. The first one is that even when money is tight, or especially when money is tight, it's very, very important to protect some groups of people. And this is people at risk of poverty, at risk of social exclusion, and people with chronic conditions, people who are already ill. And 2 very concrete steps that countries can take in terms of redesigning their coverage policy to protect these groups of people is to delink access to healthcare from health insurance status. And in the region, we have really good examples from countries like France and Cyprus and Spain that have taken steps to do this. The second coverage policy step that countries can take is to exempt people who are poor, people with chronic conditions from co-payments, because we know that co-payments are a big source of financial hardship for households. The second policy area is to really give greater priority to health and to social spending, social protection spending in the coming years as part of the government budget. Countries are going to need sustained increases in public spending on health and social protection, and countries will need to find ways to find that money from the budget. And I think that this is really a question of political will. Multiple surveys carried out by the OECD, by the EU, by the UN show that this is really what people want. They want countries, they want their governments to invest in better health and better social protection. And then the final policy area is to say, spend on health publicly, but make sure that that spending is really achieving value for money. Make sure that it is doing what you want it to do, that it is absolutely able to meet the equity and the efficiency goals that you have in the health system. So in summary, really austerity as experienced after the previous economic crisis, after the global financial crisis, really is not an option this time if countries want to protect people and to continue to make progress towards universal health coverage and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that there is an international consensus now that many of the austerity policies were a mistake. And it's also very clear that there is really no economic recovery without health security. I think that has been brought out very, very clearly by the pandemic. But it's also clear that health security is not something that happens automatically. It requires political will. It requires better tax systems so that governments can spend on the things that they need to spend on and redistribute in the way that they need to do that. And I think it also requires international solidarity. And although we have seen very, very positive steps from the EU and from other actors in this crisis, I think one of my key messages is don't be complacent, don't take these things for granted. All of us need to work very hard to make sure that this consensus really stays in the years ahead. Thank you very much for listening. Over.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Thompson, for this information about how important it is to ensure equal access to medical care services. Now we are moving to our last presentation on today's program, and the presentations of the previous presenters have laid a solid foundation for Mr. Umut Ergezer from the RCC Secretariat. He is the Southeastern Europe 2030 coordinator, and today he's going to speak with us about what is expected from participants in anticipation of our upcoming event on the 25th. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Nowak. Basically, if we were having this event in physical terms, pre-COVID environment, I would have said that it's my job very difficult because this would be the last speech before all the participants having or going to the lunch break. So, but now that as this is an online seminar, I would suggest you can turn off your cameras and go and grab a sandwich in your kitchen and get back and then listen to me if you can. So because my task is basically what we are expecting from the participants, particularly for the second day. And I would also like to share a couple of slides regarding this process, the preparation process that we have been undertaking for the Southeast Europe 2030 strategy. So if you let me, that I'm going to share my screen to show a couple of slides to you. Yes. So as Tanya mentioned in her introductory remarks, that during the preparation of SC 2030, we have employed a bottom-up approach in order to ensure regional ownership of the strategy of 13 SC economies through enhanced consultation and transparency, and to really guarantee the relevance of the actions that we will be suggesting in the framework of the strategy to the socioeconomic realities of the region. That's why we applied the UN methodology on the preparation of national voluntary reviews, but I would like to take note of the absence of a methodology, an international methodology for the preparation of regional SDG strategies. So this is just for the attention of our international speakers and international media, that we are ready to share our experiences in preparing a regional strategy on SDGs implementation in the absence of a methodology suggested internationally. But this time, basically, that we would like to emphasize the importance of consultation process and transparency, because not only the team in the RCC, but we have, let's say, contact persons in each 13 SC economy. Plus these contact persons facilitating us to reach out to public authorities, governments, and then ministries in the 13, as well as through this seminar, but through also our collaboration with think tanks, we are trying to reach out to all the relevant stakeholders and civil society organizations in the 13, as our objective is to share the draft. So we did not share the adopted version of the strategy, but we would like to discuss with all the relevant stakeholders today and Tuesday the draft strategy in order to collect their comments and contributions to the draft and to help us to finalize the document. So this is the process. I'm not going to explain you each box. So far we have we had some 45, 50 different meetings. As Tanya again said, that it started with the mandate granted by our leaders, SCCPs, in this SCCP summit in 2019. And then we actually went through all the bureaucratic processes, preparing the concept note, getting the approval from the board. But also we have run a first round of consultation with 13 economies, including the European Commission. And then we prepared the first draft, which all you have received. And now we are in the second round of consultations with SC economies, with regional and international organizations, some of which are invited, which we actually listen to their distinguished speakers. And then we are receiving their comments. And also with civil society, as I said, again, I would like to underline, at least on Tuesday, that we would like to encourage all the participants to actively participate in the discussion and share their insights and comments to the draft strategy, and which we are committing to take them into account and incorporate these comments as appropriate to the draft. And our deadlines are very short, that we are aiming to circulate the final draft as of 1st of June to the governments of 13 economies, with the expectation that this strategy is to be adopted in the upcoming SCCP summit in Antalya on 17th of June. So the objective, needless to repeat, but it's basically to reach regionally sustainable economic growth in our region called Southeast Europe. Our vision is that to have this strategy, at least we are suggesting, as a joint call for action in the SCE to leave no one behind. And for the moment, the draft has 3 different pillars: prosperity, people, peace and partnerships, which actually consolidate 13 different priorities and suggesting 61 different actions. But still, as I said, that this is a draft, and then we are ready to discuss, we are ready to improve the quality of the document and listen to the participants, advisors on the actions, on the priorities, how they see and how they can help the region in reaching the sustainable development goals. So if I'm allowed to say a couple of words about pillar 1, prosperity, in terms of priorities, that we are aiming to emphasize the importance of trade creation in the SC as intra-SC trade and transport connectivity, but also to underline the importance of outreaching to the overseas markets. Promotion of investment in renewable energy is also one of the priorities. Natural disasters risk reduction and reducing digital divide, together with public private sector partnership and development finance, are counted as additional priorities under the first pillar. The second pillar as people of the SC includes better utilization of human capital, supporting diaspora to promote economic activity in SC, improving access and quality of education and health, as well as equal access to justice. And lastly, but not least, the access to the environment and sanitation services. So far, all those pillars and priorities are agreed with 13 SC economies. So they did not have any objection to the content. They confirmed. Even a couple of priorities are requested by them to add into the content. So we can count of their political commitment and ownership, to work at the regional level on these policy areas. And the third pillar is peace and partnerships, is that the smart implementation of SC 2030 through intra-SC regional dialogue and networks, and as well as to facilitate region-to-region dialogue mechanisms. And as well, also we would like to include sustainable funding mechanisms of SC 2030 under this third pillar. Cross-cutting areas in all pillars are determined as the common denominator. Not only these, let's say, 3 pillars, but these basically cross-cutting areas are horizontal issues that are cross-cutting to these 3 pillars, is that poverty and inequality, digital transformation and green transition, and the public-private partnership. So if I say a couple of words per each priority, and to give you some maybe provocative statistics and data about each priority. For prosperity, as I said, that trade will be one of the priorities that we are suggesting, particularly creating intra-regional trade. As of today, the overall intra-SC exports between 13 economies reach $68 billion US. But if we look at, and if we divide the region into East and West, East may include 5 different economies: Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Moldova. And West is the remaining WB6 plus Croatia and Slovenia. Basically, 66% of this $68 million US intra-SC exports are done by the East, while the remaining 33% is done by the West of Southeast Europe. But if you look at West to West and East to West trade, SC economies in the West are doing 77% of their intra-regional exports with the neighboring economies in the west part of SC, basically 77%. While East economies in the SC, even though they have relatively larger economies, they are only doing their intra-regional trade with the western part of the region, only 22%. So basically there's a big potential to create trade between East and West in the SC. If you look at the transport connectivity for the outreaching to the overseas markets, except 2 maritime ports in the region, one in Greece, another one in Turkey, the remaining maritime ports have very low interconnectivity with the overseas markets. Before having this presentation, I checked a couple of data. For example, olive oil, how we are exporting to olive oil to the US. I look at, for example, Greece, US, or Turkish exports to US, and the Croatian and Albanian exports of olive oil to US. And then we come up that exporting from Greece or Turkey to US olive oil is 7 times cheaper than exporting from Croatia or Albania to the US because of the maritime connectivity. In terms of, let's say, natural and human-made disaster risks, that even though we don't have reliable data, but we actually are informed that the sharing the risks in the region, in the countries, are very low. That insurance coverage of the households or the economic operators to natural disaster risks is very low in the region. For renewable energy, mainly our economies are relying on fossil fuels. Only 15% of total energy supply are from renewable sources. And regional average of coal in energy supply reaches 26%. Financial sector, basically, as many speakers said, that we don't have any problem of capitalization of our banks, but the loans to assets and loans to GDP of our banks to the private sector and to the household is very low. Sectors in value formation, particularly, many of our economies are relying heavily on services. For agriculture, that if I may say that the 13 C economies cumulated agricultural lands is much bigger than the cumulated agricultural lands of France, Germany, and Switzerland together. So there's a big potential in agricultural production, though efficiency of our agricultural production is very low. When we come to people, I would like to take the attention of all participants regarding the risks that we have and we will be having in the future. We say that the population and the decelerating the population is one of the key objectives of this strategy. And it's a combination of high immigration, but also the depopulation by natural causes. We actually, if I can refer to the UN estimations, forecasts on demography, on population, in 80 years, by 2100, our population in the region will be 20% less. Now we are 150 million people, and it's forecasted that in 2100, we will be 122 million people. While dependency of our old people to the working age population today is 26%. In 2030, it would be 33%. In 2060, it would be 54%. And in 2100, it would be 60%. So we are basically having less people, and the remaining people in our populations, in our societies, are getting older and older. For health, which is one of the key priorities, in the SE, our average life expectancy is 77 years, while the EU average is 81. So we are having less shorter life expectancy in the region. For education, we actually refer to the OECD PISA studies, and except Slovenia, all 12 economies are below the OECD average in terms of their scores in PISA test in OECD. And if you look at the equality or inequality in education, for the upper secondary education or access to upper secondary education, these are all regional averages. In poorest quintile, 60% of our population only can reach upper secondary education, while our wealthiest quintile is reaching by 96% of our wealthiest quintile is reaching or having upper secondary education. So for peace and partnership, definitely the stakeholder engagement will be at the top. We will keep these dialogue mechanisms with the civil society, think tanks, academia, as alive as possible, also during the implementation of the project. We will try to have our national parliaments engaged, at least to have them regularly informed about the implementation of SC 2030. We are going to promote regional dialogue mechanisms, but also region to the region. So Southeast Europe as a region to Black Sea region, or Southeast Europe as a region to Mediterranean region, and to share our experiences and knowledge between these regions and regional organizations. Through SC 2030, we are suggesting to increase attention of our governments to make the national budget's responsiveness to the UN SDGs, as well as aid effectiveness, because Western Balkan 6 and Turkey, but particularly Western Balkan 6, in the recent years are the top recipient of official development assistance per capita. And during the preparation of the SC 2030, that we actually make a comparative analysis of the donors' attention in these policy areas and national priorities of SDG implementations by each country or by each economy in the Southeast Europe. And we actually identify that the donors' actually attention to policies sectors which attract donors' attention are not fully matching with the priorities of the recipient economies in the region, even though these recipient economies, at least in the recent years, are the top recipients of development assistance per capita. So that's why we would like to increase the attention and awareness of the donors towards the endeavor of our economies to reach and to implement sustainable development goals in the framework of SC 2030. As cross-cutting areas, as I said, our main objective will be to emphasize just and equal transformation transition process, particularly in digital transformation and green transformation. For the means of implementation, we are suggesting three main instruments. One is regional actions of solidarity, which could be implemented through regional dialogue mechanisms, regional networks, or peer reviews, regional technical assistance, which could be implemented by the economies of the SCE with each other. The second group of actions, which we would like to have them implemented through international technical assistance, which could be commissioned to different international organizations according to their expertise. And the third one is that relying on the scale of Southeast Europe, which the GDP of which is reaching $2 trillion, may attract some IFI support, and some of the actions could be turned into bankable projects. So monitoring and evaluation, basically in the draft, majority of targets and indicators are imported from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, from global targets and indicators. And then we are aiming to have the strategy, not only the targets and indicators, but the whole text, particularly the actions, regularly updated for every 2 years. So implementation schedule, I don't want to spend our time too much, but the initial period will be devoted to this, let's say, regional solidarity actions and preparation of, let's say, international technical assistance, provided that the funds are available. The midterm and the initial period will end with an update of the strategy in 2023. And in the midterm will be allocated to the international technical assistance projects, and if the funds are available, IFI finance projects. And even in the midterm, that there will be 3 regular updates every 2 years. And the final term will be devoted to the exit, at least, of the ongoing projects. So our expectations from today, and particularly the session on Tuesday, that all the participants invited to the breakout sessions, we are really sincerely looking forward to receiving their comments and contributions to the draft. I would like to underline the fact that this strategy, the draft strategy in front of us, is a regional strategy, which is including 13 SC economies. And then the implementation of that strategy is to be facilitated by the RCC. The targets and indicators, as I said, that are not sui generis, are not, let's say, proposed for region specific, but mainly imported from the UN SDGs, because at least all SC economies are committed to implement. And we would like to basically facilitate the region's endeavor to reach these targets and goals. But we would like to hear from the participants also their understanding, their advices on the targets, while these targets should be realistic, but definitely can be ambitious. Indicators, if they want to suggest how the implementation could be measured, then I would advise the participants' comments. At least they can take into account that those indicators that they may propose should be measurable, and the data collection should be less costly. And if they actually refer to some existing data when they are proposing indicators, it would be ideal, because when we are actually proposing these targets, particular indicators, we actually pay our utmost attention not to create additional burden on our national statistical offices, but referring to the available, publicly available data, either national or international sources. Particularly, we are expecting from the participants to propose actions, either new actions or their comments on the existing actions that we are suggesting. But these actions should be regional and should justify regional intervention rather than national level intervention, because this strategy is a regional one, not a national one. So the mandate which is given to us at the regional level. So the actions that our participants may propose in each breakout session should pay attention that it should be justifiable at the regional level. And then we will appreciate that if they can share their insights, how the actions that they are proposing could be implemented through the means of implementation as foreseen by the draft SC 2030, which I briefly mentioned in the previous slides. So, as you know, I don't want to repeat the agenda of Tuesday, but there are 4 different breakout sessions, and under each sub-item, we are expecting to have detailed discussion and consultation with the civil society and all other relevant stakeholders who will be participating in each breakout session. So this ends my presentation, and I'm back to you, Ms. Novak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gezer. And we are right on time. We will have just under 15 minutes to address the question and answer session of this. And for this portion of our program today, I would like to reintroduce the Deputy Secretary General of RCC. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Novak, and thank you very much for moderating this first part. It was highly informative, and it took a lot of time to explain the all elements of the preparation of the document, which is, for us, it was very important, all of you, to be aware of. The one thing that we did not say up to now is actually that I would like also to introduce some of the team, a part of Umut. Umut is the main coordinator on behalf of the RCC, but also there are 2 very important ladies that are included from the RCC, Evisi Kopliku and Petra Balajic, I see Evisi, I don't see Petra, but please correct me if she is not here. And Dima Hadji-Brišević, she is helping us technically in preparation of all of the work. But basically, we also consulted the whole of the RCC experts. That means that each and every of us participated and dedicated the time in the preparation of the document. So yes, we do have 10 minutes for the discussion. I don't see, and I was checking with the VC, there is no question up to now, but please, even if there is no question, just switch on your mic and jump in for the comments, questions, additional need for the additional explanation, whatever you might think it will help you for the preparation of the document. And yes, thank you very much, VC Mary is also our intern, was also very helpful in our joint work. Thank you, Mary, very much. So please, now you do have the possibility to have the floor. Of course, that I'm not going to push for the discussion if you need more time after the presentation today. As I promised, I'm not going to push. So I'm going to wrap it up. Again, without big conclusion words, just to stress again that I am personally very grateful to both TEPAV and ELIAMEP. Dear Ioannis, thank you very much for your help and support, and short time that you have to organize all of this, but also thanks to all civil society organizations coming from the Southeastern Europe. Looking forward for the discussion on Tuesday, if I'm not wrong, it's Tuesday afternoon with the breakout sessions, where of course your expertise will be extremely valuable. We cherish your knowledge, experience, and inputs. Yes, we are dedicated to work primarily with the national authorities of the Southeast Europe 13 economies, but the expertise in this area is also in the hands of the civil society organization, and that is invaluable input that we can have from you. Thank you very much for your time that you dedicated to listen to our explanation, and also the new information coming from our dear partners. Have a nice weekend, and looking forward for the continuation of the discussion. All the best to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So this brings our event to a close today. On behalf of ELIAMEP, we would like to thank the speakers, the participants, our counterparts at TEPAV, and of course the RCC and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for involving us in this process. And we look forward to seeing everyone on Tuesday. Have a good afternoon.